So since the planning conference last year, the board of directors authorized the water working group to move forward for another year. And at that time, there were a whole series of recommendations that came out of the water task force that propelled APA's action on water issues, a wide range of issues. So we formulated the water working group. A group of amazing individuals came together, and we began to identify a series of initiatives, 5 initiatives to be exact, where we began to identify areas for progress for the American Planning Association. And those initiatives quickly relate to conducting a survey of the APA membership with respect to water issues. The second initiative, if you will, was advancing a water policy guide for American Planning Association. The third initiative was beginning to formulate some critical partnerships for the American Planning Association. And the fourth initiative relates to developing some guidance for comprehensive planning as planners engage in comprehensive planning and sustaining communities activities throughout the country. They need more help on components of comprehensive plans. And the last relates to educational efforts. And we're looking both at trying to improve the kinds of water curriculum that planners get in graduate school and undergraduate programs, as well as programs for practicing planners and appointed officials who are involved in planning, and how they can begin to improve their knowledge of some water issues. So I would like to go over them sort of in a little more depth and tell you about them. With respect to the survey, that was absolutely amazing. The American Planning Association went out and to all the members, and we received over 900 survey responses. And this was not a small survey. The survey contained 75 questions. There were, I think, 16 or 17 questions that had fill-in-the-blank answers. So we were really gratified by the response of the planning membership and providing their responses of their experience on water issues. Some of the results that came out of that were that planners are most involved in stormwater issues and flood issues, which is interesting because it really relates to managing runoff and in terms of the urban and built environment. They are also involved in water supply and wastewater issues, but to a lesser degree. And one of the interesting findings was that we suspected perhaps that planners really didn't have as much involvement in comprehensive plan incorporation of water utility work. So new water treatment systems or new supply development or wastewater. We suspected planners were being consulted on those kinds of projects. It turns out that they really weren't, but they also were reaching out to those utilities and developing comprehensive plans for regions. So they were incorporating the utility component in terms of whether it confined development or allowed development to proceed in terms of availability of water utilities. So that was an interesting outcome. Some of the other results from the survey really involved the fact that 80% of the planners felt it was a top 10 issue. 10% of the planners felt it was the top issue for planners across the country, which we thought was a little amazing, given the fact this is the American Planning Association has been involved in water for a long time, but this is a relatively new development that they formulated a task force and began to focus much more closely on water resource topics. So that's the survey results will be published to American Planning Association members very soon, and we'll be sharing that information with all the membership. The second initiative is the Water Policy Guide. APA had developed some water policy guidance about 10 or 15 years ago, and it was time to update that. We worked very closely with APA's Legislative and Policy Guide Committee and formulated a whole series of new recommendations. And the idea of that really is to begin to coalesce the thinking of practicing planners with respect to water policy. And this relates to regulations and funding and really how to promote more of a one water environment. And one water is a new concept that we're beginning to advance, and also with some of our partner professional organizations like the Water Environment Federation, American Water Works Association, and many other groups are involved in this. But one water treats water as a single holistic resource and recognizes the interconnectedness of that in an urban environment. So It's really an important initiative that begins to think about water not in silos of water supply, wastewater, stormwater, but begins to think about it as a whole cycle and the effects and opportunities for water management in an urban environment. So that was sort of a very interesting focus of the new policy guide. The other really important initiative is one that relates to the partnerships. And I mentioned AWWA and WEF, and there are a whole series of other organizations, American Water Resources Association. I'm sure I will get letters from everyone telling me about not mentioning their particular organization. But in terms of water study and research, there's one thing that environment does not lack, and that is it does not lack for research or involved groups. There are a million groups out there, and I exaggerate slightly, but there are many groups that are involved in water management. And one of the issues for planners is being able to sort out who has the information we need to plan better with respect to the water environment. So we're starting to build some partnerships. There are 2 research efforts underway now. One is integrating water management with urban planning and design with the Water Environment Research Foundation. Another is integrating land use and water resources planning with the Water Research Foundation, which works with AWWA. So there's some very interesting partnership initiatives going on. And this is really one of the focuses. If you begin to think of One Water in terms of connecting all the water environment elements, we also want to begin to connect all the water management agencies, and we want to connect scientists and planners and hydrologists and regulatory folks and economists to really work on water together. And that's the partnership element will be critical moving forward and is a major cornerstone of our work. There are 2 other initiatives I mentioned. One is relating to comp plan guidance, and we're developing a series of recommendations for additional specific research that would go into a supplemental document, if you will, that would attach to a comp plan or attach to a sustaining communities plan. And those would have specific recommendations for land use practices and land management practices that would protect water, would promote recharge, that would recognize the connectedness of water. And the last initiative has to do with education. And I mentioned we're looking at both the academic realm in terms of how to improve graduate and undergraduate programs and education, specifically with respect to water. And we found, actually, we did a survey and found out that many of the graduate programs do include water elements, but only as part of a class, not as a focused class within the program. And we see that perhaps expanding in the future. And then we were working with Carolyn Torma at APA and identifying a whole series of new educational initiatives that would provide webinars, conference material, publications, that would be resources for planners in improving water practice. So that's a quick summary of what we've been up to for the last year, and we're hoping that the board authorizes us to move forward with our work for another year. APA has a very vibrant Healthy Communities initiative underway, and there are a number of issues that have come up in the news recently, like that in Flint, Michigan, that ask questions about healthful water supply, protecting the public, and you can see clearly that the water environment and water supply and wastewater management and the health of our rivers and streams, that they be fishable and swimmable, all really connect to healthy communities. There are 2 real issues that the Water Working Group has identified over the last year. One is the real need for an infrastructure bond act, an infrastructure bill, if you will, that will help fund improvements in water supply and wastewater management and stormwater management throughout the country. We feel that that's going to be critical in terms of rehabilitating communities like Flint that have some very antiquated infrastructure that's over 100 years old. They're disadvantaged communities. There are a whole series of social equity issues as development fled to the suburbs after World War II. Communities like Flint were left behind in terms of infrastructure investment and rehabilitation. So we see the need really to begin to focus on healthy communities from a water perspective, both in terms of achieving better social equity and achieving better investment in those systems, and also beginning to bring some of the new tools from One Water and green infrastructure management into those communities to help make them more aesthetic, more vibrant, and more energized spaces for those residents. So I've outlined for you quickly, or maybe not so quickly, some of the initiatives of the Water Working Group over the last year. And a number of folks have asked us, where do we go from here? I spoke to Jim Dryden, APA Executive Director, last night. They're very excited about the work of the Water Working Group. They're very interested in moving this forward in a very proactive way. They feel that this really represents an opportunity for planners to connect even more so with communities, with the development process, and with the infrastructure process that underlays most community development and redevelopment. We're hoping that they authorize the work moving forward for another year, and then also begin to move into perhaps a more formalized structure for supporting water planning at APA in the future. There are a whole series of initiatives. There are the 5 initiatives I discussed earlier, and each one of those requires continuing work. We're not really done with any of those. The fact that we have a survey with 900 responses, and I think there were over 150 individual responses giving us comments, asking us for further action on specific water issues, tells us that there's much more work to be done. So we're looking forward to continuing the work. APA appears to be very supportive at this time. We'll be looking to build new partnerships with sister professional organizations and other resource agencies. NOAA, in terms of their work supporting climate change and disaster recovery, has been a key agency, and we'll be meeting with them Monday of this week. So we're looking forward to continuing this growth of the water planning initiative for APA.